The cameras were rolling when it happened. It's a live broadcast, millions watching, and Kellyanne Conway leaning forward in her chair, her voice already at a pitch that pierced through the studio air. Her words came not as measured debate, but as sharp, cutting interruptions, a tone familiar to anyone who had seen her spar before. She wasn't just speaking, was raising her voice, pressing over the top of every syllable Jasmine Crockett tried to offer. Crockett sat still, her posture unshaken, her eyes steady on Conway. It was the kind of calm that seemed to frustrate an opponent even more, a silence that refused to bend or break. Around them, the energy in the room shifted. Producers in the back exchanged quick glances. The audience murmured under their breath. Something about this imbalance, one woman screaming, the other unflinching, was already telling a larger story than the words themselves. The first interruption came almost predictably. Conway cut in, her voice layered with urgency and dismissal. Forcing her way over Crockett's opening line, Crockett stopped, waited, and then resumed as if the storm hadn't touched her. But then came the second interruption. Louder this time, more insistent. Conway's face flushed with the kind of passion that borders on frustration. Again, Crockett didn't rise. She simply let the wave pass, her tone steady, her gaze unwavering. The third interruption felt like a breaking point. Conway's voice nearly escalated into a shout, her sentences tumbling over Crockett's words. Fighting for dominance not through argument but through sheer volume. The tension in the studio thickened like smoke. It was no longer just a disagreement, it was spectacle. Viewers at home could feel it too, the clash of two energies, one chaotic, one composed. And then came the pause. Crockett sat there, hands folded, breathing even, waiting with the kind of patience that seemed less like surrender and more like preparation. Every second of her silence deepened the suspense. Everyone in the room leaned in, wondering if the Congresswoman would finally crack, if Conway's shouting would drown her voice completely. But on the fourth attempt, Crockett's calm reply transformed the broadcast into an unforgettable showdown. Section 2, Raise. The stakes 600 words. This was never just sparring. To the casual viewer flipping channels, it may have looked like another heated exchange in a long line of political debates. But underneath the raised voices and flashing studio lights, something deeper pulsed through the confrontation. This was a battle over dignity. It's a battle over who gets to be heard, who gets to command space, and who gets reduced to silence when the stakes are highest. Kellyanne Conway carried herself with the kind of condescension that had become her trademark. In conservative media circles, every word she spoke dripped with dismissal, as though her opponent's perspective was not only wrong but unworthy of being voiced at all. She wasn't debating so much as steamrolling, using interruption as a weapon. It was the politics of volume, a strategy that assumes the loudest voice wins, that if you scream hard enough, the other side has no choice but to shrink. But Jasmine Crockett was not shrinking, and that, more than anything, unsettled the balance in the room. Because Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman. She was the embodiment of something much larger than herself, the weight of communities who had spent generations being talked over, ignored, erased. Women of color who had watched men and women like Conway take the microphone and never give it back. Immigrants who had seen their voices dismissed before they even opened their mouths. Everyday Americans who knew exactly what it felt like to be silenced at the table of power. Her composure wasn't just personal discipline, it was symbolic. Every time she refused to match Conway's volume, every time she sat still instead of shouting back, Crockett was reframing the rules of engagement. She was showing millions that calm could be its own kind of weapon, that dignity could cut sharper. Then raged on, the country noticed. On one side of the screen, Conway's voice strained louder, her words spilling faster, her interruptions mounting. On the other, Crockett's stillness grew heavier, more deliberate. It was a contrast so stark that it transformed the debate into a mirror of America itself. Power versus voice. Arrogance versus composure. Shouting versus calm truth. Viewers at home could feel it. This wasn't just about policy or political labels. This was about respect, who deserves it, who withholds it, And what happens when someone refuses to be denied it? Every scream from Conway carried an echo of decades of dismissal, and every silence from Crockett carried the resistance of those who refused to vanish. And as the minutes stretched on, the tension only grew. This wasn't noise anymore. It was theater. It was history unfolding in the small gestures, in the long pauses, in the tilt of a head, and the refusal to flinch. The imbalance that had once seemed lopsided, Conway in command, Crockett on the defensive, began to shift before the audience's eyes. With each scream, millions leaned closer, wondering, would Crockett shatter or shatter expectations? Kellyanne Conway did not arrive in that studio as an amateur. She walked in as a veteran of political warfare, polished from decades in the trenches of Washington spin rooms and cable news sets. For years, she had mastered the art of manipulating narrative, bending conversations and weaponizing interruptions until her opponents drowned in frustration. She wasn't just a debater. She was a strategist of chaos. Conway's style was always unmistakable. While others came armed with facts, she came armed with tactics. She could take a simple question and stretch it into a labyrinth of half-answers, distractions and counterattacks until the audience forgot what was asked in the first place. Critics called it gaslighting, supporters called it brilliance. But everyone agreed. When Kellyanne spoke, her words weren't arguments. They were daggers, sharpened for television sound bites, hurled not to persuade but to pierce. It was a style that had made her infamous. During her tenure as a senior advisor in the Trump White House, Conway pioneered phrases that blurred the lines between truth and spin. Alternative facts wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was a window into her entire method. In her world, control wasn't about what was true. It was about what stuck. Whoever dominated the airtime, whoever filled the silence first, won the perception battle. And in politics, perception was everything. On countless panels, she had perfected the rhythm. Interrupt before the opponent builds momentum, dismiss with a smirk, then flood the airwaves with her own narrative. Volume wasn't an accident. It was a weapon. The louder she became, the more it tilted the playing field. Forcing her adversaries into the impossible choice, shout back and look unhinged, or stay quiet and appear weak. Either way, she won. That night on live television, she carried the same armor, the same clipped tone, the same practiced scorn, the same conviction that domination through interruption was not only effective but inevitable. She leaned forward in her chair, jaw tight, gestures sharp, the body language of someone who believed experience guaranteed victory. To the untrained eye, it looked like confidence. To those who had studied her for years, it was something else, the reflex of someone who only knew one way to fight. Yet there was also a paradox in her presence. Conway was polished, yes, but in that polish was a sheen of patronizing dismissal. She didn't just disagree with her opponents, she diminished them. She gave the sense that engaging them at all was a charitable act, that their ideas were not worth the oxygen she spent dismantling them. It wasn't about a contest of ideas, it was about hierarchy. And in her hierarchy, only one voice deserved to rise above the others. Hers. She had made a career out of this imbalance. But she knew how to manipulate producers, how to create viral clips that echoed across networks, how to spin even her harshest moments into ammunition for her base. More than once, she had turned her opponent's visible frustration into the story itself. Look how rattled they were. Look how unprepared. It was a pattern she wielded like clockwork, a blueprint for televised dominance. But this time, something was different. The tactics were the same, the sharp interruptions, the raised volume, the mocking dismissal. Yet for all her experience, Conway was meeting a kind of resistance she hadn't anticipated. Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She did not scramble. She did not take the bait. Where so many before her had crumbled under Conway's barrage, Crockett simply sat, eyes locked, her silence louder than Conway's screams. And in that silence, the daggers started to dull. What good is a weapon if it finds no target? What power does an interruption hold when the person interrupted refuses to bend? Imbalance was beginning to turn. Conway still threw her words like blades, sharp and fast. But the audience was watching something new, the veteran villain swinging wildly, and the hero absorbing every strike without so much as a crack. What once looked like dominance now looked like desperation, because even the sharpest dagger is useless when it strikes an unshakable wall. Asterisk long before Jasmine Crockett sat across from Kellyanne Conway in that studio. She was already forged in the crucible of confrontation. To understand the weight of that moment, you have to understand where Crockett came from, the battlegrounds of Texas, where being a woman of color in politics wasn't just an identity, it was a fight for survival every single day. Crockett's story doesn't begin in the limelight of television cameras, but in the quiet grind of classrooms, courtrooms, and communities that rarely saw themselves reflected in halls of power. She trained as an attorney not for prestige, but for purpose. For her, the law was never a distant theoretical game. It was the only shield many vulnerable people had against a system designed to forget them. She cut her teeth in male-dominated courtrooms where her presence alone was an act of defiance. Picture it. A young black woman stepping into chambers where her counterparts were seasoned men in expensive suits, where condescension dripped from their voices before she even spoke. She was underestimated before she opened her mouth, dismissed, before she presented her case. But then she spoke calmly, precisely, with the controlled fire of someone who had learned that dignity can cut sharper than rage. Her courtroom instincts became second nature, composure under pressure, razor sharp, cross-examinations that dismantled lies one thread at a time, the ability to absorb hostility without losing focus. She learned to pause when others shouted, to slice through bluster with surgical precision, to hold her ground when the air turned hostile. These weren't just professional skills, they were survival strategies in arenas stacked against her. And it wasn't only in courtrooms. In the Texas legislature, Crockett faced a political climate often openly hostile to voices like hers. Every debate, every hearing, every speech was a test. Could she stand her ground when powerful men rolled their eyes? Could she keep her composure when colleagues dismissed her as too emotional or too inexperienced? Time and again, she did more than stand, she thrived. But there's a deeper layer to Crockett's journey. For her, every microphone wasn't just about her own career, it was about the communities she carried with her. Women of color, immigrants, working-class families who knew what it felt like to be silenced or ignored. When she spoke, she wasn't simply Jasmine Crockett, attorney or congresswoman. She was a vessel for voices that had been shut out of political media for generations. That weight shaped her. It gave her both a fire and a calm, a duality that made her unique. Fire, because she knew injustice not as an abstract idea, but as something lived, breathed, survived. Calm, because she understood that to endure in those hostile spaces, she couldn't afford to crack. Rage might be justified, but composure was powerful. Each hardship became a rehearsal for moments like the one with Conway. Every sneer from a courtroom rival, every interruption from a political opponent, every insult disguised as a question, they weren't defeats, they were sharpening stones. They honed her patience, her timing, her ability to withstand the storm without ever losing sight of her own voice. So when Conway leaned forward, voice rising, daggers of interruption flying across the table, Crockett wasn't shaken. She had seen this performance before, many times, in different costumes. She had survived it in the form of dismissive judges, hostile prosecutors, arrogant legislators. She recognized the rhythm of dominance play, cut off, talk over, claim control, and she recognized, too, that the surest way to beat it was not to match it, but to let it crumble under its own weight. And here's the cinematic truth. Crockett's composure wasn't just about strategy. It was about survival and dignity. She knew that for women like her, especially black women in the public eye, one flash of anger would be weaponized forever. The burden wasn't fair, but she carried it with grace. Her calm wasn't silence. It was resistance. It was power. That night on live television, Crockett's every breath carried the echoes of her journey. The immigrant mother she once defended in court, who had been silenced by a system that barely acknowledged her. The young activists in her district who wanted proof that someone like them could stand tall on the national stage. The families who tuned into politics only to feel alienated, waiting for a moment when someone finally spoke with their voice. And as Conway screamed, Crockett's calm became louder than any outburst could ever be. Viewers watching at home leaned closer, sensing that something unusual was unfolding, that this wasn't the typical cable news shouting match. It was a clash of archetypes, the old politics of domination, colliding with a new politics of resilience. The power dynamic was shifting, not through volume, but through presence. And in that shift was the weight of every courtroom battle, every insult endured, every cause defended. Crockett wasn't just surviving the moment, she was owning it. Every courtroom, every insult, every defense, all of it had prepared her for this exact live broadcast. Asterisk back inside the studio. The broadcast was no longer a debate. It was an unraveling. Kellyanne Conway's tone sharpened with every sentence, her voice climbing into the red. Her hands sliced through the air, gesturing as though sheer force of movement could make her points more convincing. She leaned forward, closing the space between them, her words not arguments but weapons hurled with increasing velocity. The air vibrated with the electricity of confrontation, but across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, still as stone. She didn't flinch. She didn't mirror the chaos thrown at her. Instead, she let Conway's storm crash and crash again, while she remained the unshaken shore. Her silence wasn't absence, it was defiance. Her eyes stayed locked, steady, refusing to acknowledge that shouting deserved a response. The imbalance was unmistakable. Conway grew harsher, her voice cracking into shrill notes that cut through the studio. Crockett, by contrast, radiated composure. It was a duel of energies, one frantic and grasping, the other centered and immovable. The producers behind the glass exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene. This wasn't the clean back and forth they had prepared for. It was a spectacle. Teetering on the edge of collapse, technicians adjusted audio levels, straining to contain Conway's voice as it threatened to pierce into distortion. The anchors on set shifted in their chairs, their forced smiles betraying unease. And yet, for the viewers at home, the dynamic was crystal clear. One woman was clawing for dominance. The other was commanding respect without saying a word. Conway pounded her words harder, raising her voice until it almost drowned out the echoes of her own contradictions. Her tone carried not just urgency but desperation, as if she feared losing control of a narrative she was used to owning. The louder she became, the more she revealed, not power but panic. Crockett, meanwhile, mastered the art of patience. She let the seconds stretch, her stillness louder than any rebuttal. Every measured breath was a reminder that calm is not weakness, it is strength weaponized. Where Conway burned her energy in furious sparks, Crockett banked hers like an ember, waiting for the precise moment to ignite. The tension became palpable. Viewers could feel it through the screen, the weight of an entire history of silenced voices pressing against Conway's tirade. This wasn't just an argument over policy. It was the collision of two Americas, one clinging to dominance by volume, the other asserting dignity by restraint. And as Conway's volume climbed, her gestures widening, it became clear she was performing for the cameras, fighting not her opponent, but her own slipping grasp on control. Each interruption grew more frantic, each dismissal more transparent. What once felt like dominance now read as desperation. The studio audience murmured, sensing the imbalance tipping. It was the kind of collective whisper that signals a tide, turning the moment before a reckoning. The air felt heavy, charged, as if the silence itself was waiting for release. Crockett finally shifted. Not much, just a lean, subtle, deliberate. Enough to signal she was ready. Enough to send a ripple across the set. For the first time all night, she moved forward, eyes unblinking, posture unyielding. The storm on the other side didn't stop. Conway screamed her loudest yet, voice breaking into raw strain. But it was in that exact instant, the height of her noise, that Crockett's calm broke through. Not with volume, not with fury, but with the kind of quiet authority that announces, without question, the tide is about to turn. And then, as Conway screamed her loudest, Crockett leaned in with the calm that signaled the storm was about to shift. The screaming stopped, not with resolution, but with exhaustion. Conway's voice, once a steady torrent of practiced lines and biting interruptions, finally burned itself into a hoarse rasp. Her hands lingered mid-gesture, her face taut with the effort of domination. And in that sudden stillness, the silence pressed down like a weight. Jasmine Crockett did not rush to fill it.
8.
She waited. She let the moment stretch beyond comfort, beyond what the producers wanted, beyond what Conway herself could tolerate. The cameras captured every second of her composure, the unblinking eyes, the controlled breath, the faint glimmer of something deeper than patience, certainty. The silence became louder than Conway's shouting ever was. It demanded attention. It pulled the audience closer, made them lean forward in their living rooms, gripping the edge of their couches, waiting for the response. And Conway, for the first time in the broadcast, had nothing left to swing. When Crockett finally spoke, her voice was low, deliberate, and sharp enough to cut glass. "You know," she began, her tone calm but edged with steel, "I've been interrupted more times in the last 5 minutes than I was in entire courtroom trials against men twice. Your size, and just like them, the shouting doesn't change the truth." The words landed with surgical precision. Conway shifted back, visibly jolted, her polished smirk faltering under the weight of Crockett's composure. The cameras caught the recoil, a flicker of vulnerability in someone so used to being in control. Crockett didn't press the advantage too quickly. She paused, letting the sentence hang, letting the studio breathe in the contrast. The silence punctuated her every word, turning each one into a strike that landed harder than any scream. "You think volume is power?" she continued, her eyes steady. "But power is being heard when you speak softly because people know it's worth listening." The producers froze behind the glass. No one moved. No one dared signal a cut or an interjection. They knew the air had shifted, that the balance of the entire broadcast had flipped. The woman they thought might be drowned out had taken control. Without raising her voice, Conway opened her mouth, but what came out wasn't sharp. It was stammering, scrambling for footing, a reflex more than a strategy. She tried to summon her old rhythm, the quick pivot, the cutting soundbite, but Crockett's calm dismantled it before it could form. "Let me explain," Conway began. "No," Crockett interrupted, her tone still even but edged with finality. "You've explained enough. You've screamed enough. The truth doesn't need volume to survive. It needs clarity." As the studio fell into stunned silence again, it wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a reversal. For the first time that night, Kellyanne Conway was the one interrupted, and it was not chaotic or rude. It was decisive. It was a boundary being set on national television, the kind no one could ignore. The tension in the room didn't dissipate, electrified. The cameramen leaned into their viewfinders, knowing instinctively that they were capturing the moment that would replay across millions of screens within hours. Social media was already pulsing, timelines lighting up with snippets clipped in. "Real time?" Crockett just shut her down. "Is how you handle a bully. Calm, greater than screaming." Crockett went on, her tone measured, her delivery deliberate. "I came here to debate ideas. I came here to dominate airspace. This isn't your stage. It belongs to the American people who are tired of being shouted over. Immigrants' families working to jobs just to be told they don't matter. Your yelling doesn't erase their reality." It wasn't just a clapback. It was a sermon wrapped in a rebuttal, aimed not just at Conway, but at the millions watching who saw themselves in Crockett's restraint. Conway sat back, blinking rapidly, visibly rattled. For once, she couldn't find the line. Her opponent had robbed her of the one weapon she always relied on: control of the tempo. The silence, the pacing, the calm. Crockett was dictating the rhythm now. And Conway was left stumbling in its wake. Crockett's voice didn't rise, but its resonance grew stronger with each phrase. If leadership is just about who can yell the loudest, then maybe you've already won. But if it's about truth, respect, and the courage to listen, then I'll let the people decide who really won tonight. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. It wasn't just a mic drop, it was the kind of statement that rewrites the memory of everything that came before it. Suddenly, the shrillness of Conway's tirade seemed smaller. It's almost embarrassing. While Crockett's calm now loomed monumental. The shift was instant and irreversible. You could feel it not only in the studio, but out there in the invisible space of millions of living rooms. The comment sections, the tweets, the watch parties, all erupting with recognition of the moment they'd just witnessed. Conway tried once more weakly to retake ground. Your twisting Crockett raised a hand, not to silence, but to command attention. No, I'm clarifying. There's a difference. And with that, the confrontation ended not with volume, but with a single truth no one could deny. The quiet voice had carried farther. The producers, finally moving, exchanged the looks of astonishment. They knew the broadcast had just birthed its defining clip, the one that would be replayed, memed, dissected, and immortalized in highlight reels for years. Her voice, measured and calm, did what Conway's screams never could. It carried truth, but the ripple outside that studio would prove even louder. It took less than 10 minutes before the broadcast had even cut to commercial. The clip was already spreading like wildfire. Someone, somewhere, had snipped the exact 30 seconds when Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, met Conway's screaming head-on, and delivered her quiet, devastating reply. Within minutes, it was climbing Twitter's trending list. By the end of the hour, hashtags lit up the platform like fireworks. Hashtag Crockett.com. Hashtag Conway screams. Hashtag Clapback Queen. The speed was dizzying. On TikTok, creators layered Crockett's words over cinematic music. Slow-motion edits of her composure, contrasted with Conway's frantic gestures. Its memes sprang up by the thousands. Conway drawn as a cartoon villain shrieking into a void. Crockett cast as the unbothered queen sipping tea. One viral edit stitched Crockett's line. The truth doesn't need volume to survive over scenes of Martin Luther King Jr., Malala Yousafzai, and other icons of dignity under fire. YouTube reaction channels flooded the algorithm. Some titles screamed for clicks. Jasmine Crockett ends Kellyanne Conway on live TV, or this is how you handle a bully politician. Others leaned into admiration. Crockett's.com is pure power. Overnight, the clip became not just a political moment, but cultural currency. Predictably, conservative outlets scrambled to reframe. On Fox segments and fringe blogs, commentators called Crockett disrespectful or arrogant, accusing her of undermining civility by refusing to yield. They clipped the footage to distort the silence, portraying it as smugness rather than strategy. Headlines warned of the rise of radical leftist disrespect, yet even their outrage only amplified the reach. By railing against her, they made sure their audiences saw the exchange, and many saw through the spin. On the other side, progressives and moderates alike rallied in celebration. Crockett's name trended not just as a politician, but as a symbol. Women of color across platforms wrote about how her poise reminded them of their own battles in boardrooms, classrooms, and workplaces where they'd been shouted over immigrant. Families shared the clip in WhatsApp groups, calling it a lesson for our children. College students turned her quotes into protest posters overnight. Comedians quickly joined the wave. Late-night monologues replayed Conway's shrill interruptions before cutting to Crockett's single, calm line, always earning the loudest applause. TikTok parody skits mocked Conway's shouting fits, inserting subtitles like error, argument, not found, or looping her outbursts into absurd remixes. The humor only deepened the divide. Conway became the caricature, Crockett the icon. But the most powerful impact came from the ordinary voices. In thousands of comments under the viral video, viewers shared deeply personal stories. I wish I had Crockett's calm when my boss tried to humiliate me in front of the team. This is for every immigrant mom who was told her accent made her less American. She didn't just answer Conway, she answered for all of us who've been screamed over. The clip became more than entertainment. It became validation, and with validation came momentum. Political commentators noted how rare it was for a single debate moment to break into the cultural bloodstream. This quickly, hashtags turned into petitions, calling for Crockett to be featured on more networks, to be given a national platform beyond this one confrontation. Journalists dissected the exchange in op-eds, with headlines like "The Power of Poise in the Age of Outrage" and "Why Crockett's Calm Matters for America's Future." Even celebrities chimed in. A-list actors tweeted admiration. Musicians reposted the clip with emojis of flames and crowns. Influencers turned Crockett's calm into aspirational lifestyle content. When life screams at you, be a Crockett. By the following day, the numbers told the story. 20 million views across platforms, hundreds of thousands of shares, a dozen trending hashtags. Crockett's name had broken into Google's top searches overnight, nestled among celebrity gossip and breaking world news. And still the question lingered. For all the memes, for all the laughs, for all the applause lines, there was something deeper stirring beneath the surface. Crockett's moment wasn't just about a televised argument. It was about something larger. Dignity, refusing to yield to condescension, voice, refusing to be erased, calm truth defeating chaos. The country was laughing. Yes. Cheering, yes, but also reflecting. People were beginning to ask, what does it mean in this moment in history to hold steady when the world screams at you? Because beyond the hashtags and viral edits, a lesson was beginning to echo across America. When the laughter quieted, when the memes slowed their surge, when the hashtags eventually slipped down the trending list, something more enduring remained. Jasmine Crockett herself stepped forward to reframe what had happened. For her, the moment wasn't about scoring points against Kellyanne Conway, and it wasn't about basking in viral fame. It was about something deeper, the dignity of being heard. In interviews that followed, Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't weaponize the clip to elevate her ego. Instead, she pointed to the broader lesson. This was never about me, she said. It was about what it means when voices are dismissed, when whole communities are told their truth doesn't matter. I didn't respond to Kellyanne Conway for my pride. I responded for every person who's ever been shouted over, ignored, or erased. Her words struck at the heart of the debate, because that night wasn't truly a contest of volume. It was a clash between two visions of what politics could be. On one side, the belief that power lies in dominance, that raising your voice can drown out inconvenient truths. On the other, the conviction that integrity doesn't need to shout, that calm persistence can outlast arrogance. Noise fades, truth endures. Crockett's moment proved that in a way millions could see with their own eyes. Conway's shouting, dramatic as it was in the moment, now plays back almost like background static, a desperate scramble that grows smaller with each replay. Crockett's calm reply, however, only grows stronger with time. The stillness, the patience, the piercing precision of her words. They echo longer than the noise that tried to smother them. For women of color, for immigrants, for anyone who has ever been told to sit down or be quiet, the clip became more than political theater. It became proof that restraint is not weakness, that composure is not surrender. In Crockett's reply, viewers recognized the quiet courage of their own lives, the times they had swallowed their anger, the times they had refused to meet hostility with hostility, the times they had stood firm and said, in their own way, I am here, and I will not be silenced. That's why the moment mattered. Not because a politician had a clever comeback, but because a woman facing the force of dismissal stood her ground without losing her grace. She didn't descend to Conway's level. She didn't fight chaos with chaos. She answered arrogance with dignity, and in doing so, she reminded the nation that dignity is its own kind of power. And that is the lesson Crockett carried forward. The truth doesn't need to scream. Justice doesn't need to throw a tantrum. Those who stand firm with steady voices and clear conviction can outlast the storm. Her words became the inspirational crescendo of the story, when arrogance screams to silence justice. It takes courage to speak with steady conviction, and remind the world we still have a voice. That single line, born in the heat of live television, grew into something larger. A mantra, a reminder, a call to action. It urged people not to mirror the cruelty of those who shout them down, but to hold fast to the quiet strength that history so often underestimates, because, in the end, it wasn't a scream that carried across America that night. It was a calm reply, firm, steady, unshakable. And it is that calm, that conviction, that will be remembered long after the chaos has been forgotten. But even as the nation drew inspiration from Crockett's stand, one final question lingered in the air, a question that pointed directly to the future. What happens when millions, not just one, decide to answer arrogance with dignity? Kellyanne Conway screamed, Jasmine Crockett replied, and in that reply, everything flipped. What began as chaos, a clash of volume and ego, became a lesson in dignity that millions will never forget. The arc was simple but seismic. Conway tried to dominate, Crockett chose patience. The world watched the reversal unfold in real time. This wasn't just a viral clip. It was a reminder that politics isn't only about policies or polls. It's about presence, about how we carry ourselves when the spotlight burns hottest. Crockett didn't just defend herself. She defended the very idea that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. And that's where you come in. If moments like this speak to you, if you believe that courage outshines arrogance, that dignity outlasts noise, then you're already part of the movement we're building here. At Viral Insight, subscribe now, hit that bell, and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded. Calm is not weakness. Calm is power. Because history isn't written by those who scream the loudest. It's written by those who dare to stay calm when silence is demanded and still speak anyway. So let this not just be Jasmine Crockett's moment. Let it be our moment. Together, we amplify the voices that refuse to be drowned out. Together, we prove that the truth, steady and unshaken, always rises above the noise. The story isn't over. It's just beginning, and you're a part of it. Now imagine this. What happens when millions of voices, each calm and resolute, rise together? That's not just a viral moment. That's history in the making. The moment America can't stop talking about. What started as a heated shouting match on live TV took a jaw-dropping twist no one saw coming. Kellyanne Conway's explosive outburst. Jasmine Crockett's savage calm reply. The unforgettable clash that left the studio silent and the internet on fire. This isn't just a debate. It's a showdown over dignity, power, and truth in front of millions. Every scream, every silence, every second. Built to the one reply that flipped everything upside down. Watch until the very end, because the final line isn't just viral. It's legendary. Drop your reaction below. Was this the most shocking live TV moment of 2025?